Bitcoin is a massive bubble, a Ponzi scheme squared. A strategic Bitcoin reserve is ridiculous, and a big correction is looming. These are the arguments from one of the leading gold experts in Germany, Dimitri Speck, who is really going hard against Bitcoin. We're going to take a look at what's behind this criticism and whether Bitcoin is really a bubble or a Ponzi scheme squared. I also have to say that I really appreciate the work of Dimitri Speck because he does a great job of educating people about financial bubbles and, of course, the monetary system in general. I've watched a lot of his interviews and he really does a great job here. But when it comes to Bitcoin, he could be definitely wrong. The question I always ask these gold bugs is whether it's really true, like Michael Saylor always says, that they're afraid of the big demonetization, that their Bitcoin is going to demonetize the gold market. Or are we, as the Bitcoin community, wrong here and the gold bugs criticism is justified? But feel free to check it out for yourself and see what Dimitri Speck, as a gold expert, has to say about Bitcoin. Or are we, as a Bitcoin community, wrong here and the criticism of the gold bugs is justified? But feel free to check it out for yourself and see what Dimitri Speck, as a gold expert, has to say about Bitcoin. By the way, this video was published on Dominic Kettner's YouTube channel, which also does really great work educating about precious metals and is definitely open to Bitcoin.
Is the Bitcoin bubble about to burst in 2021, or is it going to keep heading towards a million, or as the Bitcoiners would say, to the moon? Welcome, Dimitri Speck.
I'm excited.
I'm excited too, and we have a great hook right now with Bitcoin's all-time high, especially since gold has only hit 5 or 6 all-time highs this year, I think. But let's dive into Bitcoin.
Yeah, as it was widely reported in the media, Bitcoin not only surpassed its peak from 2021 and then 2024, but it also hit that round number. You can definitely see Trump's election in the background, after which Bitcoin shot up. So Trump wants the Fed to buy Bitcoins. A senator even said that we should buy Bitcoin and then in 2045 write off or pay off half of all debts. It's kind of like if I went to my bank and said, give me a loan in euros. I'm paying it off by investing 5 or so euros in Bitcoin. I don't know if the bank would go along with that, but it really shows how euphoric and at times absurd the mentality is here. All you see here are just price increases. Bitcoin is actually increasing percentage-wise less and less compared to its history. We have euphoria, really strong euphoria. For example, the stock of MicroStrategy, which is basically an investment company in Bitcoin that buys Bitcoin on credit, and where there's suddenly a premium of over 200% compared to Bitcoin. So for me, it's almost like a pyramid scheme squared. Anyone who knows me knows that I consider Bitcoin to be a pyramid scheme. We might not need to start that discussion again today, but when you really look closely, I don't see anything that could be considered money. But right now, I just want to analyze this technically. Bitcoin is just in this extreme euphoria, sparked by the election, and it's really accompanied by fantasies, let's say, from Bitcoin investors, all the way into politics. That's really noticeable, I'd say. And in the euphoria, the horse dies. Now let's see how it goes from here. Correction could definitely be on the way. And I don't think, just to say that central banks are going to buy Bitcoin on a large scale, like some people think, that would be pretty atypical. They hardly buy stocks. So why would they specifically buy Bitcoin? I think these are just signs that there's a lot of euphoria in the market. And high euphoria is often 1,000 trend reversal markers.
So that was a really interesting assessment. And first of all, it's always a good thing when there are warning voices that kind of take some of the euphoria out of the Bitcoin market, because we have to be clear that, yes, the market is a bit euphoric right now. The question is whether we're already overheating here, because if you look at the Google search queries, it's clear that we're not at an overheating point yet. So it's not comparable to the peak or anything like that. Of course, it is now being covered in the media from time to time. But we also see how much bad and negative reporting there is still in some parts of the media. And that's why, of course, corrections can happen at any time, but we also have the volatile movements in Bitcoin that mean we're always moving upwards. And to talk about a bubble or an exaggeration at this point, I definitely can't agree with that, but we can discuss it openly, and it's a completely legitimate point he's making. Where it might get a bit critical, though, is when he says, for example, says that Bitcoin isn't money. I mean, Bitcoin is just like gold, something that emerges from the market. It's not something that's imposed on people by a state or anything like that. People choose to use Bitcoin voluntarily. And if we go through the properties of money, like for example, verifiability, divisibility, portability, scarcity, and so on, Bitcoin actually has more properties of money than the dollar or even gold, because gold isn't as easily divisible. And gold isn't as scarce as Bitcoin. Bitcoin is absolutely limited, just relatively limited. Bitcoin has way stronger censorship resistance than gold, and it's also obviously way more censorship resistant than fiat money and so on. I don't want to badmouth gold either, because Bitcoin and gold can coexist. There's no need to start bashing the gold folks here. Gold is definitely a very, very good vehicle that has historically done a great job of preserving purchasing power. The only thing Bitcoin might not have yet is widespread payment acceptance, but gold doesn't have that either. Can you pay everywhere with gold at the bakery? And then you make a really interesting point here, saying that Bitcoin is a pyramid scheme squared. Warren Buffett once said something similar. He said that Bitcoin is rat poison squared. Its criticism may not hold. Bitcoin is decentralized, whether he even understands Bitcoin technically. Because Bitcoin is a decentralized money system, which means there's no leader, no group, and no CEO behind Bitcoin. And if something is set up in a decentralized way, how can there be a Ponzi scheme? In a Ponzi scheme, there's always a scammer. There's a group that's skimming off the money and so on. A Ponzi scheme also relies on new people constantly putting in money, but with Bitcoin, the whole thing would still work even if no new people came in. In a pyramid scheme, there is always a scammer. There is a group behind it that schemes off the money and so on. A pyramid scheme is also based on the fact that new people always have to deposit money, but with Bitcoin, the whole thing would work even if no new people joined. The price would actually keep rising because if the demand just stays constant, but on the other hand, the supply gets cut in half every 4 years, then we'd see a rising Bitcoin price even with steady demand. And what's also interesting is that now all the gold folks are definitely going to get a bit triggered when, for example, here people also say, okay, we sell gold to buy Bitcoin, like for example, Cynthia Loomis or Michael Saylor. And he can't imagine that one would build up a, let's say, Bitcoin strategy reserve at the national level because he simply says that Bitcoin is similar to a share and the nation states here don't hold shares or anything like that. So first of all, that's wrong. I think Switzerland is actually the largest shareholder of Apple or something like that, or some tech stocks and so on. Switzerland definitely holds shares, but it must be said that Bitcoin is not a share, but Bitcoin is a commodity, and accordingly Bitcoin is comparable to gold here. He says Bitcoin isn't comparable to gold, but it's a digital commodity. No company or foundation is behind it. If gold is in central bank balance sheets, why not Bitcoin? Bitcoin has gold's properties and more. Easier to transport, more divisible, scarcer, and better censorship resistance. And if gold is held in central bank balance sheets, what's stopping us from holding Bitcoin in central bank balance sheets? Because Bitcoin definitely has properties that gold has, but it also has additional advantages, like being easier to transport, more divisible, scarcer, and having better censorship resistance and so on. Because digital, we live in the digital age, so of course we need digital money, a digital store of value. I'll link the whole video down below, so you can check out the entire interview on Dominic Kettner's Precious Metals channel.
Mark Friedrich just called for 1 million, so there's really no stopping Bitcoin now, right? I don't want to bash Bitcoin or anything. Don't get me wrong. What I really want to understand is, are we sitting on a bubble here? Your book is called The Biggest Financial Bubble of All Time, or is Bitcoin more like a safe haven from the bigger bubble, the fiat money system?
Yeah, that's what Bitcoin investors believe, but I see it differently. For me, Bitcoin is tied to the financial crisis. That was one of the main reasons. It was initiated to create a decentralized payment system and money independent of banks and states. Now, it's a bit ironic that Bitcoin fans are excited thinking the Fed would buy Bitcoin, when Bitcoin has already become state-sanctioned, in the sense that the government hasn't accepted it as money or as a bond vehicle, let's say, because there are ETFs for Bitcoin, and it was actually the inflows into those ETFs in the past few weeks that caused the price to rise. These weren't just regular Bitcoin purchases. So Bitcoin is, if you will, already well established as a financial vehicle. Otherwise, there wouldn't be any ETFs. So I really don't know what else is supposed to come from that. Yeah, I think that's just part of the tech bubble. So to speak, that we also see in tech stocks. And it shouldn't be viewed as a counterpart to gold. I could get all economic on you, but I'll skip that for now. We've already talked about why that's not the case in earlier videos. So I want to say this more technically because there's so much excitement in the market that Bitcoin could be facing a correction. Gold, for example. That's more our specialty, and silver might have suffered a bit from that. I have to be clear about that, even though not by much. We're still close to the peak prices for gold, but it's clear that when a lot of money flows into Bitcoin, it pulls some investors away from gold.
This is interesting. They're discussing how Bitcoin has lost its way, initially meant to separate state and money. Now, with Bitcoin ETFs, it's constrained by fiat. BlackRock uses Bitcoin. Dimitri Speck's criticism is valid. And now we have Bitcoin ETFs, and it's being pushed into a fiat straitjacket and so on. Now BlackRock is using Bitcoin, big hedge funds are using Bitcoin, and so on. And of course, you can definitely agree with Dimitri Speck's criticism, and I see it critically as well. I am very critical of what BlackRock and so on are doing, but you just have to say that Bitcoin is there for everyone. Bitcoin is also there for your enemies, even the enemies, BlackRock, or they are not the enemies, but theoretically everyone can use Bitcoin, and that is the genius of it. And it's unrealistic to think Bitcoin is just a cyberpunk tool. Now, asset managers realize it's unstoppable. We must accept Bitcoin is in fiat. And that's good. Bitcoin is for everyone. Bitcoin is inclusive, like gold. So we have to join in, and hey, we as the Bitcoin community have to absolutely accept that Bitcoin has now arrived in the fiat world. And that's not a bad thing at all, because like I said, Bitcoin is here for everyone. Bitcoin is an absolutely inclusive system. It doesn't exclude anyone, just like gold doesn't exclude anyone either. Gold has also found its way to institutional investors through gold ETFs for quite some time now. You could see how the price of gold shot up after gold ETFs were introduced. You can see something similar happening with Bitcoin, and I don't think it's wrong at all for financial products to be created around Bitcoin. I mean, Dimitri Speck should know best how many certificates exist for gold. I mean, he's probably always going to say, hey, buy physical gold and not gold certificates. It is the same with Bitcoin. It is better to buy Bitcoin directly, idachi. At 21 Bitcoin, I'll drop a link below so you can buy Bitcoin directly, and it's best to put it right on your own hardware wallet, like a Trezor or something. I'll also include a link for that below, and you can get discounts with the code Bitcoin Hotel. That way, you're really set up well, because then you don't have a certificate, you don't have an ETF, you don't have some option on Bitcoin. You actually have Bitcoin in your own custody, just like if you were putting gold in your own safe. And that's a huge difference when you have third-party risk from an ETF or the exchange versus holding Bitcoin in self-custody. And you really have to say that a lot of people only buy the ETFs because it's not possible to do it any other way from a regulatory standpoint. You can't hold Bitcoin in self-custody from a regulatory standpoint, and it's somewhat the same with gold. A lot of people, institutional investors, they can't hold gold directly. So they just buy a certificate instead because they, for example, they manage other people's assets and not their own. And accordingly, yes, you can look at it critically, I certainly agree, but let me say that he then, for example, he says Bitcoin is a technology bubble, which might be, let's say, a bit of a stretch because he doesn't really provide any reasons for that. So why is Bitcoin a technology bubble? Are there any fundamental things that I've missed here? Yeah, he's talking about the euphoria or whatever, but are there really any fundamental analyses? Like we're seeing now, for example, are all the long-term holders suddenly selling, or are we seeing a ton of new retail folks jumping into Bitcoin, like people who are new to the market? Are we seeing a lot of new people coming into the market? We're not really seeing that at the moment. It's more institutional folks who are coming into Bitcoin. As I mentioned before, Google search queries aren't really that high yet, and anyone can just drop a line saying Bitcoin is a tech bubble, but you really need to back that up with fundamental arguments. I keep saying it over and over again. Bitcoin isn't the bubble. It's actually the needle that pops other asset bubbles, just like gold does in a slightly milder way. Because we see that new money is being printed, cash is flowing into circulation, central banks are starting back up with low interest rates, and they might even go for quantitative easing next if things keep going like they are now. If we get back into a high money cycle, that money, fiat money, which can be expanded infinitely, will flow into hard assets like stocks, gold, real estate, and Bitcoin. And we see that Bitcoin also has the highest correlation here at 83% to global liquidity. Gold and real estate stocks have less correlation, which is why these markets are inflating. Investors are realizing Bitcoin's advantages over real estate, gold, and stocks. People are shifting from bonds, gold, and stocks into Bitcoin. Although the effect is small now, Bitcoin is like a black hole with the potential to absorb the monetary premium from these asset bubbles. And what's happening now is that people are shifting. They're moving out of bonds and into Bitcoin. They're moving out of gold and into Bitcoin. They're moving out of stocks and into Bitcoin. Of course, the effect is still very, very small right now, but Bitcoin is really like a black hole that has the potential to suck the entire monetary premium out of those asset bubbles. So, Bitcoin is more like the needle that lets all the bubbles pop or maybe even causes them to burst. It might not be popping them outright, but it's definitely slowly sucking out the monetary premium. It does let the bubbles burst, not the other way around, but Bitcoin itself isn't the bubble. The hype that Michael Saylor spreads is just massive. Of course, it bursts the bubbles and not the ones that burst the bubbles, but Bitcoin is not the bubble itself.
The hype that Michael Saylor spreads is just massive. But what a lot of people don't realize is that as a dot-com entrepreneur, he lost $6 billion in one day during the dot-com bubble. And now in the Bitcoin rally, he might just be on the right horse. Go no. The question I want to ask you is, do you think that this rally, especially with Bitcoin hitting the dollar mark, might attract a wider audience and signal that it's a good time to cash out? Do you have an opinion on that? Or would you rather not make a recommendation?
Yeah, I'm basically against pyramid schemes, and that's why I'm against Bitcoin. And like I said, from a technical standpoint, I see that the round number is often a point where markets turn. We had the Dow Jones, which struggled at the 1,000 mark from the early years until 82. We also had the gold price, which took a long time to finally get past the 1,000 mark. He almost touched it back in 2011. So round numbers are often more of a barrier. Once those are reached, it doesn't just keep going automatically. That's pretty unusual. And then we have this technical euphoria. And when a market is completely euphoric, the premium of over 200% for MicroStrategy is a clear indicator, especially with high volume. Yeah, the stock was traded with very high volume, which is a clear sign that there's extreme euphoria going on. And if you look at the blogs where Bitcoin fans talk, it's pretty clear to them that the number is now moving to 1 million and that central banks are buying Bitcoins. I've read things that say the central banks holding the most Bitcoin will dominate the world for the next 100 years and other stuff like that. So the imagination is really running wild here. And that's definitely a warning sign for me, technically speaking.
So he's clearly positioning himself against Bitcoin because he doesn't support pyramid schemes. I already touched on that earlier. Let me know in the comments what you think about these statements. Can you guys relate to the criticism? Or do you think that they're really missing the point and maybe haven't even delved that deeply into the subject? Shout out to Mr. Speck. We can definitely have a conversation. I actually wanted to write you an email anyway. I actually saved your email address a while back. You were actually always on my interview list. It would be really exciting to actually do an interview with them. It's not about talking about them, but rather talking with them. Of course, allowing criticism here is always really nice when you can express it. I think they'll be able to handle this. My reaction video. Many points are open for debate. I might not be right about everything. Viewers can comment if they think Bitcoin is a bubble or more. I'm not saying that I'm right about everything. Viewers can also comment below on how they see the whole thing, whether they think the gold bugs are right that Bitcoin is really just a speculative bubble or whether there is really more to Bitcoin. Leave me a like down below if I should reach out to Dimitri Speck. See you later. Peace out. See you later. Take care.